Jeff Hayward wrote a piece called "We Should Not Be Angry About Artificial Intelligence, We Should Be Angry About This," where he talks about the rising anger from society to tools like ChatGPT, which are perceived as job thieves and art mimickers. Like, people should understand that AI isn't sentient, and it itself has never made the decision to replace human labor. Those decisions are always made by human managers and business owners in an attempt to increase profits. And that's just not a new phenomenon. We've seen Photoshop replace photo editors in the past, or bank tellers being replaced by ATMs. So Jeff argues, instead of resenting the technology, the focus of discontent should be on the capitalist system that it lives within. And if you imagine the two, when they clash, the problem is going to be in the human decision-making process. Because AI is simply a tool that can be leveraged to produce more with less cost. However, there's a good argument to be made that the pendulum swings both ways. Jeff Hayward also points out that big companies might be getting into AI a little too fast. Certainly it's a good investment, but when you see the capabilities, you make some assumptions about what it's going to be able to do soon, and you start firing employees that you might need longer than you think, you might get yourself into hot water. Like, you might start using something like GPT-engineer and be like, I don't need any junior engineers at my company anymore. This can do the first round. But certain bugs start slipping in there, certain methodologies kind of fall apart, and then later you've got a much bigger fire to put out. And that could be something that would be spotted early on with a thoughtful human that the AI just can't do yet. And the same could go for all sorts of generative content, not just engineering problems. And for this reason, having a human who can proofread it, convey the information to other people inside the company, think about the strategic planning of what it's doing, might be worth keeping around for a while. And that's why I think that professionals who are starting to work with AI probably don't need to panic as much as you'd think yet. Because embracing the technology and making sure that it's implemented correctly and building new workflows around it, I think you're going to be valuable to your boss for quite a while. Now, that might not be true in all cases, but I think if you can develop some kind of a skill to discriminate and figure out the best things that your AI is generating, how they matter, that part is just going to be useful for a while. Like, I personally think about this in terms of autonomous cars because I was wrong about how long it would take to implement them and how many truck drivers would lose their job. Like, the reality is there's still a bunch of truck drivers, and I kind of thought by this time we'd start seeing, kind of the beginning of an exponential layoff curve, which I don't think we are. And pretty much indefinitely, I think companies want to make sure that their model becomes smarter, better, more efficient, has better quality data, and I can't quite imagine a world where AI is actually handling that whole process flow anytime soon. And smash that subscribe button! There's a bunch of great data that just came out about how artificial intelligence is being used all over the world in this new research paper called the Global AI Index. So let's start with the rankings. Okay, so the Global AI Index is underpinned by 111 indicators collected from 28 different public and private data sources and 62 governments. So the overall rankings take into account talent, infrastructure, operating environment, research, development, government strategy, and the commercial sector. And coming in first place is the United States. And although I'm proud of that, being an American, I would love to see the government strategy a little bit higher, and absolutely the operating environment down at 28. That's pathetic. We should at least get into the top 10, maybe top 5, preferably number 1. We're supposed to be America, forget the red tape, let business do what it's supposed to do. And of course, hot on our heels, China with a solid second place score. Now, I didn't really know what to expect, but I don't think I saw Singapore being the third, but the United Kingdom, Canada, South Korea, Israel, Germany, Switzerland, Finland, Netherlands, Japan, France, India, these are all countries that do seem like they're making lots of progress. Now, when you reorder it by talent, it tells a different story. Interestingly, you can see China fall quite a bit down the chain, whereas India jumps right to the top. I find India's place extremely remarkable, especially considering their infrastructure is at 59. That means an extremely poor infrastructure, but top talent? What a weird dichotomy. When we reorder by operating environment, strangely, you see some of the countries that have more regulation than you would expect at the very top. I think of Denmark, Sweden, China, and Finland as all places where the government does get quite involved in business, which I normally think would slow down the operating environment, but maybe that does make things better somehow. Now, jumping over to research and development, now this story seems to be what I would have expected. In terms of R&D, it's US and China neck and neck, 1 and 2, and then the top 10 clusters around the countries I would have expected. However, going to government strategy, didn't see this one coming at all. Saudi Arabia, I I wouldn't have expected, but now that I see it there, it kind of makes sense. You know, Germany and China are countries that want to be world leaders, and AI makes sense for them to build strategies around. Spain, Canada, South Korea, Russia, US, Italy, I'd love to just see better strategy. It's a little bit different story when we go over to the commercial sector. So when you sort by the commercial sector, United States takes first place with China in second, Israel, Singapore, UK, Hong Kong, Canada, and then Estonia shows up. Now, the spider charts give you a chance to really visualize what's missing in a country's whole complete AI strategy. For China, it's a talent shortage. For the UK, it's an operating environment. For Israel, it's a government strategy. And for the US, it's an operating environment problem. Now, if we view the countries by average funding, you can see just how big the circles are for China, the US, Hong Kong, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, especially considering the size of the country. So you can see the size based on average funding of AI companies. Then you can break that down into startup funding versus commercial funding. The number of AI unicorns that it produces is the $1 billion club. So this is total AI funding in comparison to the GDP. So it shows you how much people really care about it compared to their other needs, which is interesting. Israel definitely proportionally thinks it's the most important. How much the government only spends in proportion to GDP. So it's clear for Saudi Arabia, AI is a big government project. So I find this chart particularly interesting because it shows you over time how the countries are staying in comparison relative to one another. And US and China stay in first place, but everyone else moves down a notch, mostly just because of Singapore moving up. So intensity is a metric that they came up with that measures AI's capabilities relative to the size of the country's population or economy. So these big dots are obviously China and India because of their population size. But you can see way up here, this little dot for Singapore is like way more intense than every other country on the planet. And honestly, I don't think about Singapore much when I'm thinking about big AI players, but with that kind of intensity, I think I probably should. Israel, they're ambitious. Like, their AI plans are ambitious. Switzerland, probably a little underrated in my head, so I better start thinking about them as more of a player. So now let's see how that looks in the US job market. I've got some more metrics for you. New data from Adzuna is in. They're a global job search platform, and they talk about how AI jobs are looking in the United States right now. And the good news is, if you're into AI, there's many six-figure jobs available. In June, there was about 7.6 million jobs available in total for the whole country, with about 170,000 of them requiring some AI skill. And out of those, a little over 3,500 that are specifically AI oriented. Some are research, software engineering, data science, the kind of thing you'd expect. But also a lot of them are just for like fintech or tax management. Things you might not think about, but there's a severe shortage in AI talent going into some of these other industries. Accounting firms, tax managers, plus the relevance of AI jobs is moving up every single month. Since the introduction of ChatGPT in late 2022, it's now on the radar of a lot of CEOs, and that is trickling down to the jobs that they're hiring for. And one particularly hot spot is with chatbots and customer service. There's a big shift for chatbots to look through inventory and help people make purchases. A survey found that 70% of LinkedIn's top companies are already using AI, and 32% expect significant gains in the upcoming years. And just as a small sample, AI is listed as a top hiring priority for companies like EY, Wells Fargo, and Kaiser Permanente. You know, companies I don't always think like, oh yeah, they'd be hiring AI people. And if you're super into AI and you're thinking, man, I could probably be an AI consultant, which we've talked about in previous videos, I would say that a lot of these larger organizations would really benefit from building an AI team dedicated to that project inside of their company. And I imagine this internal team having the sole goal to survey the field for where AI might fit in the specific situation of whatever that company does. So for example, they might look at the finance team and say, okay, I'll just set a small goal by making sure that instead of writing spreadsheet functions, they actually use a large language model to write them for them. So you go to the finance department, you make sure there's an LLM connected to everybody's Excel spreadsheets, right? And then you check in weekly to make sure that they understand how to use it and that it's beneficial and if you need to tweak it in any way. Then you go to the content team, make sure they have access to Midjourney. Go to the software team and figure out a better way to take all their documentation and make it searchable through an LLM. And then constantly just monitor the progress. Make sure you're making efficient gains. Put that stuff into a report. Give it to the CEO so he can see what this team is doing to actually help the company. But at the end of the day, AI is an incredibly powerful tool and it almost changes weekly. So there's no way to just say, here is how the future is going to look. Here's exactly how you should hire for it. So I'm of the opinion that we just need a lot of these kind of little teams all throughout the world. For government projects and nonprofits and just general citizen projects, open source projects, big company projects, everywhere you can, extract a little team out to observe it and implement. And then hopefully, as we see the process, the gains, the way way these things are implemented, we can start talking about moving to a society maybe that's not completely capitalist in every sense, because that tremendous value should be getting implemented across the whole world, not just concentrated in some company. But the weird thing about this is this tiny team that implements tools all across the company, if I play it out, they could slowly just be giving tools to each department, and then slowly each of those departments gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then maybe the whole company just becomes that one unit that monitors AIs that do all the other functioning of the company. And then the company becomes just like unbelievably valuable because they can spin up as many employees as they want digitally for every department. And then just some CEOs and those people who have equity and the shareholders end up incredibly rich. And we have this really lopsided society. Now, if systems like that are also implemented in the public sector and for nonprofits, that could be a good thing, but we're still going to eventually converge on these really small, super powerful teams. And that's when the mechanisms of just general capitalism, I'm not sure if they'll do as much for the greater good as they used to. And I don't know what to do after that. You can talk about UBI if you want to implement some big taxes on these people who are super rich and then do a universal basic income. That's a maybe. But I don't know how you move to that world. Maybe there's just so many people unemployed and so many people that are super rich, there's just kind of riots and stuff, and then we just make some big changes to the system, and that's how this is going to play out. But if you have some thoughts, I would love to talk about it, so leave them in the comments below and smash that subscribe button.